Okay, here we are. My guest today is a very accomplished musician in all different styles. I really don't know too much about him, so I'm looking forward to this opportunity to learning his story. As of right now, before the pandemic, he was playing a lot of pit shows and some stuff on Broadway, I believe, and we'll hear all about that and the stuff leading up to it. Please welcome Dan Hartington. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Ben.
So like we were just saying before I pressed the record button, you have a very interesting and unique story about to how you came into this kind of position or positions that you're doing with guitar. When I met you, it was probably when I first started studying with Chris at Central, which was the better part of a decade ago, maybe 9 years ago, 10 years ago, and you came and played Villa-Lobos Etude 2, and I said, "Oh, the classical guitar is kind of cool, uh, especially because you shredded that one to bits." Um,
That's cool. I don't remember that.
so you've done a little bit of everything. Before the pandemic, what were you doing? If everything hadn't shut down and the whole world stopped, what would you be doing right now?
Well, one of the really stable things that I've done for a very long time is I've always had at least one teaching job. Um, Usually, I would always have at least two, but for the past 2 years, I've only had one. So I teach part time at Eastern Connecticut State University. So I would be doing that 1 day a week, teaching guitar lessons and guitar ensemble. And then, other than that, I would be playing at this time, March, April, and the beginning of May. It's kind of like the peak high school musical season. So until this stuff happened, I had every week from, I don't know, maybe late January up until the beginning of May. Every single week I was doing would have been doing a different show at a different high school around Connecticut or college, mostly high schools. But so I would have been playing, I don't know, Matilda maybe about 3 or 4 times because it's popular right now. I would have been playing In the Heights, which would have been a lot of fun. And what else got canceled? Oh, Pippin got canceled too. So that's what I would have been doing for now before this summer regional theater season started.
I know next to nothing about musicals, but that's not going to prevent me from dipping my toes in the big boy waters with you tonight. Um, in the Heights, I believe they just made a movie, right?
Yeah, I don't know if it's done or if it's. I know I saw the trailer not too long ago, and I have a friend who is slightly or is somewhat involved in some aspect of that movie, um,
Yeah.
which is pretty cool because I've gotten to hear a little bit about it. But yeah, there's definitely a movie coming out. I think people are pretty excited about it.
Yeah. My vice principal at my school is like big into that, and I believe he knows some of the people that um, were were on the big production of that. I mean, I don't know if there was still one running on Broadway, but I know that he's very familiar with a lot of those people. Um, and those are not small gigs. I mean, the last time I played a musical was Shrek Junior in Wallingford, and they paid me $1,000 for 5 days of work, and it was all from like 5:30 to 7:30, and that's including tech days. I mean, those are not bad gigs.
Yeah, some of them are great like that, and then some of them are not like that. Some of
Yeah,
them, the pay runs the gamut, and it's the good thing is that there's lots of it, and being a guitar player who can do that sort of a gig, there aren't that many around, or down in New York there are tons of guitar players who can do those gigs, but up here there's not that many, so there's plenty of work to go around in that. So whether they pay $1,000 for the week or they only pay maybe like 400 or 500 bucks for the week, it's still there's enough work to add up over the high school season to supplement teaching or make a decent living.
right, right. But this wasn't always your gig. At one time, you were a full time classical guitar. When I say gig, obviously, as musicians, we draw in and we pull from all different sources of revenue. But but as a performer, you were a classical guitarist for a long time. Why don't we talk about how you got there? Because when I first met you, you were Dan Hartington, the Hart classical guitar guy. So let's start with classical guitar. When did that come into your life?
So I started with classical guitar at URI, University of Rhode Island, and this was a ways back. I think when you saw me playing A22, that was a decade after I had actually started it. So the early 2000s, I had been at URI for a year already as a history major or undeclared or something nebulous like that. And I decided to switch to music, and all they had was classical guitar. They didn't have a jazz program, they didn't have anything really with formal study other than classical guitar.
Right.
So I had already kind of made the decision that I wanted to pursue music. So I gave it a shot, and it was kind of a bumpy start, but I stuck with it, and it really kind of, I don't want to say clicked, but it grew on me, and I think it was actually maybe right around my junior year, or I guess my third year in the music program, and then the summer before my senior year, where it really went all in on it. Um,
Who
I
was? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that I had met a bunch of really good guitar players around that time, and I got really excited about it. So I kind of decided to dive in. One of my classmates also gave me a hard time about not being dedicated enough. So there was a little bit of
Yeah.
competitiveness, I think.
That tends to happen, I think, especially in the guitar world, or at least the academic guitar world. I I feel like this probably happens in jazz programs too, where when you're confronted with this, I don't want to say intimidating, but it's like a it's quite a sizable amount of things to cover to to get a good education. Not only do you have to practice, but you have to practice a certain way, and you have to understand the history of it, and you have to look through all these different lenses. But to have that community of people, either you know, lighting a fire under you or antagonizing you, not in a literal way, but sort of getting you going, or just to encourage you, or people to talk shop with. That certainly helps. What was the scene like at in Rhode Island when you were studying there? Who was the instructor at the time?
So the teacher when I was there is actually a Hartford guy, Daniel Salazar Jr.
Yeah,
Um,
big Hartford name.
Big Hartford name. He's an institution in Hartford, and he was the teacher while I was there, and then I think he was still the teacher there for several years after I left. Um, so I studied privately with him, and I did a really short time, maybe 3 or 4 months, with another private teacher in the area just to kind of get ready
Right.
for an audition. I think I had to learn. I think I learned the Bach Minuet in G and Soar 5, the B
For an undergrad
minors.
audition.
Yeah, like
Okay.
crash course. Basically,
Cool.
I wrote in so many fingerings that I might as well have been reading tab. But I had to really just kind of cram to get something in my fingers, because I had gone to Daniel Salazar um, in the first semester, and I had bought the beginner Yamaha nylon string guitar for like $110 or something.
Did it come with
And
the gig bag?
no, I carried it across campus, like with in just like this over my shoulder.
Dude, you can't do that.
I literally carried it across campus over my shoulder because I didn't have a case for it or anything. It
Oh my
was,
god.
you know, it was the first week of school, so it was September. It was warm. It
Yeah.
wasn't like a cold Rhode Island winter. But I went and I played. Um, I kind of like played a little bit of Dust in the Wind to show him that I could do something, and then I played. I'd actually learned a big chunk of one of the Paganini caprices with a pick, and so I played all that for him. And I'll
I'm
never.
I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing at that's the guitar thing to do, right? Who wouldn't do that?
I mean, somebody had introduced me to Ingve.
Right.
Like I didn't know of Ingve when I went to college, and somebody who lived in the same floor as me in the dorm, he's like, "Oh man, you got to check out Ingve," and then he pointed me to Petrucci too. So I got into Ingve and I learned that Paganini thing, and I played that for Daniel, and he was like, "Well, that's cool, but that's not what we do. So you need to go you need to go take some lessons, and figure some basics out, and then come back next semester, and then we'll see what we can do."
Which is the right thing to do, right?
Yeah,
As in the moment, it feels like maybe like a slap in the face, but it's ultimately the right thing to do when you're trying to run a program and get people interested in your program.
I was so nervous and so intimidated just to be in the music area because I didn't know I just knew that I liked to play guitar. I didn't really know anything. I'd never studied it formally, and I just wanted to play. So I was in no way offended by that. I was like, okay, cool. I'll go, give me the number of who I'm supposed to call, and I'll go call them, and I'll do it right away. And I did it I'm sure I did it that night, and I started taking lessons for the first time ever. So
Yeah.
it was I was intimidated for sure by just being around there. You'd think I was walking around Juilliard with how like scared I was just being around all these musicians, and I didn't even know who anyone was.
Yeah, it's definitely a shock, especially I'm guessing this was your first time at in college, and so it's almost like it's like this magical world, right? Of university life, and then you go to this place and it's this one specific building and a whole campus, and they take music and break it down and know so much about this art form that is largely invisible and intangible. Is that a word, intangible? Or is it untangible? Intangible.
I'll go with it.
So, and it requires all this theory and understanding and brain power. I could definitely relate to that. Especially when because I went to a state school as well. Um, so what is so we have a very similar story in terms of undergrad to grad school. We studied with, and I think I can speak for both of us, we studied with a pretty strong instructor at a pretty okay school
Right.
for music, and then followed that teacher, uh, followed where that teacher went to school. I followed the actual teacher. You followed in that teacher's footsteps, and kind of saw where the how the sausage was made, so to speak. So I'll spell that out for people, for the two viewers that are watching, which is my mom and my dad.
And you're gonna have to add my mom and my dad in too.
Oh, nice.
They'll
Hi,
catch this one.
Mr. and Mrs. Hartington. Um, so Daniel Salazar Jr. studied at the Hart School with Dick Provost, right? I believe
Yep.
it was it just Dick at the time? I think there was another guitar teacher.
Alan was there. Alan Spreecersbach was there at the time, and I know that Daniel studied with Dick, but I know that he was also there, maybe for his master's or an AD. I'm not sure, but I know he was there at the
Okay,
time that Oscar was teaching there. That Oscar
his
was in
residency,
residence, so he
right?
was studying with Oscar a bit too.
So Daniel Salazar studied with, let's just say, Dick Provost for most of the time, who studied with many people, Oscar Gilia, one of them, and
Yep.
Oscar Gilia goes up to Segovia. So the people at the Hart School have a direct lineage, as a lot of people do, because the classical world is pretty small. And in no way do I say this as like a chest puffing maneuver, but we study with one of the direct lineages from one of the arguably greatest uh, contributors and players to the classical guitar. So I followed Chris Ladd. Actually went, and because he left Central when I was done studying there, and Chris Ladd studied with the same instructor that Daniel Salazar studied with which is Dick Provost. So my question for you is, what was that experience like, going from a state school with a great teacher, crash course, sort of, I'm guessing, sort of supported by the building that you were in, to going and getting like that times a million at the Hart School?
Yeah, it was great. I loved it. I loved every second of being at Hart, except for maybe some of the academic stuff that I had to do, just because I had been in college for so long that I was just kind of done with academics. I wanted to focus on playing. But at URI, when I started there, I was like bottom of everything: ear training, theory, my playing. There was nothing that I was like, I couldn't hang with any of the students. But by the end, I had gotten serious enough. I was one of only a couple, maybe 3 or 4 performance majors. Most of the students there were music ed. So by the end of my time at URI, had sort of, at least with classical guitar, sort of risen through the ranks a bit, where I had felt like I established myself as a good, as a peer amongst all the other good players. And then I got to Hart, and it was like sophomores playing circles around me, and there were some really good players there when I was there. So I was at Hart for 2005 through 2007, and there were a bunch of really good players who had just come through that I barely just missed. But then there were some really strong younger players that were starting when I was there. So um, it was
Can you name drop a little bit for us?
for the people who were there, or
Anybody?
well, some of the people that I missed who I had met through the festival, but I missed. There was a guitarist named Alex Walker who I believe is still very active, but in LA or on the West Coast, and he does a lot of commercial music. There was a guitar player named Luke Honer who I think is in the Philadelphia area, maybe. And
I've heard that name from Chris.
I got to hear Luke play a handful of times before I got to Hart, and they were both Alex and Luke were super friendly, really nice guys, and amazing players. So those were the people who I had met, but they had already gone through before I got there. Um, and the people that were there when I got there were people like this guy Phil Wright was there, a young player named Jared Elder who really sounded great, a guy named Adam Rose who sounded great, Nick Catronio was there who sounded great, um, and a guy named Derek Monahan who was a graduate student with me.
Oh, sure, I
Uh,
know him. I think my dad plays in a band with him.
yeah, Derek's a really, really great musician, and I think he would argue this, but I say he's a very creative musician. I think he would probably
Hmm.
argue against me there, but I think he's a very creative, good musician, and he was a good person for me to work with directly. So there were a lot of good players there that I really felt if I didn't work hard, there was no chance of me hanging with them.
Right. Well, what was one of those early things that jumped out at you as something where you were like, I need to fix this now, um, or like an adjustment that you realized that you had to make?
Well, I think my my memory of the timing is probably a little hazy, but the I know there I just actually shared this story with Derek recently about how him and I were rehearsing a duo together, and he said, "Hey, why can you just count your opening measures while you play them so I can hear what you're doing?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Just count the rhythms as you play." And I was like, "I can't do that." And he's like, "Oh, well, our coaching is in 2 days, and if you don't learn how to do that, Dick is going to kill you." And
Truer
it
words have never been spoken.
he may have been a little less. He may have been more blunt than that,
Right. Sure. Sure. Sure.
but it was really eye opening to think of how important it seemed to him and how oblivious I was to that even being a thing.
There's something really magical about the basics being able to take you so far in classical guitar. I'm sure this is true for other instruments, but I don't want to speak for them. But Chris Ladd says all the time, you don't have to go back to basics if you never leave them, and that really does help you. I mean, there's times when you need to do things and think outside the box and be really creative, but a lot of the time, it's that list in Dick's book, right? The list, which
Yep.
is of course the list of things you need to know in order to play a piece and play it well, play it informed, I think is the word he
I
used.
have rewritten that list for students hundreds of times. Maybe that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but I've written that list down so many times that I think I can even do it in the exact order that Dick wrote it in one of those books.
And even if somebody listening or some another musician doesn't agree with that list, the truth is, whatever your own list is, if you if you don't know all of the basics, then how can you do something that is above the basics? And so I would agree with you that that was something that was really difficult for me when I got to Hart. I had gotten some of those in my undergrad, but I think the amount, like the amount of like instances per week that I would get those reminders at Central at the state school, where it was only really one or two really good instructors, was so much less than Monday lesson with Chris, Tuesday coaching with Chris, quartet rehearsal in the morning, and then just studio class, evening with guitar. Getting those reinforcements over and over and over again really took me, and even now, 2 years out of my master's, I'll still think, oh, you know what? I know I missed that. That's one of the basics, and I wasn't as thorough with that as I should have been.
Yeah, I think actually you just hit on one of the things that makes, and I talk to my students about this too. One of the biggest differences between where I teach now or where I went and a conservatory is just the sheer amount of time you spend learning and talking and being around guitar. For my students, they see me for an hour lesson and they see me for an hour of guitar ensemble. So they get me for 2 hours a week. And as they're approaching their senior recital, they get me for a little bit longer. But
they play senior recitals at
Eastern, yes.
Eastern? Wow.
Yeah.
Is it a full hour?
It's a little flexible. It's less than a full hour solo recital, but there is a solo classical guitar component, but it's not a full hour necessarily.
That's awesome. I mean, my performance requirement to know no knock at Chris was it was the decision of the music department was, I think, to perform once a semester one piece at one showcase, and that was flexible. You could get out of it if you wanted to. And I was a music ed major, and and while you could argue, yeah, it's not as important to have that part of it down, having a slightly higher bar for performance wouldn't have killed anybody, and it probably would have given us, not just the guitar students but the other students there, a taste of what it's like.
Yeah, well, Eastern is a relatively newer program. I say relatively, it's been growing. We got the new building a few years ago, or a couple of years ago, so we've been really working on growing it. And I think the performance requirements right now for people involved in private lessons are pretty strict. You have to do 2 public performances and one of them has to be solo.
Wow.
So I've got a good group of students now, and they are generally excited to perform as often as possible.
That's awesome.
They do like we call it noon colloquium hour, Fridays at noon. Mm-hmm. And it's I think maybe 2 or 3 of those per month are student recitals, and then the ones that aren't would be like a guest lecture or maybe a student presentation of their senior thesis or something like that. But there are a lot of performance opportunities, and they are required to do at least 2 per semester, which is great. It's
that's killer. Good for you.
It's good that they have the opportunity to do that much.
Yeah. So let's move forward a little bit. You're at Hart. You're getting your ass handed to you, as most incoming guitarists do. Dick is yelling at you. Oscar's yelling at you. Everybody's yelling at you. You're crying in the bathroom. You're skipping meals.
Sounds all about right.
There was one story. I'm not going to share it now, but one story where Dick goes, "You're going to be crawling out of here by the time I'm done with you." And I was like, "Yeah, right." And I left and I burst into tears. Oh my God. That was a rough night. That was probably the worst.
I played, for my graduate recital, I played the third lute suite, mm-hmm. The A minor lute suite.
Yeah.
The one that was, I believe, the 5th cello suite, if I remember that right. And Bach transcribed it himself. Yeah. So I played that, and it's got the super slow saraband that has almost no notes.
Yeah.
and it's just like ba da 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 ba, right?
Oh, yeah, yeah, yep.
And so I went into my lesson for that, where I was supposed to play the saraband, and I hadn't memorized it, and I read it in the
This
lesson.
is this is how this is approaching your a recital.
This was, I think, in the sometime during graduate school.
Okay.
I don't remember. I don't remember when. I think it was early though. And I went in and I read it, and I had a lesson, a whole lesson. And at the very end of the lesson, Dick said something like, "By the way, if you ever come in here with one page of music not memorized, just don't come in," or something like that. And I left like pale white,
Yeah.
shaking, like, oh no, I disappointed him. I want to be here so bad, and I disappoint. And like, that was the only time I think I ever, upset him. And, or I'm sure I did plenty of times after that, but that was the only time where he really let me know that I
Yeah.
had not met the requirements
Yeah.
in no uncertain terms.
So you finish your pro. You told me. I remember. I was like, I think I'm going to go to Hart for grad school, and it was you and somebody else. And you said, yeah, good luck. It's a really hard program, and it is. It was a very hard program. I wish I could do it again. Just in a vacuum without job, family, life to get in the way. But I wish I could go and do it a second time.
That's kind of how I feel right now with quarantine.
Yeah.
I'm just shedding. I have
Yeah.
no gigs. I have no work. I have no, other than teaching a couple, a handful of hours. I'm just practicing.
So you left Hart and you tried to do the classical guitar thing for a long time, or for a period of time, and then you sort of found another set of skills that you were good at and pursued those. What was it like leaving Hart?
So let's see. I finished Hart, and I was teaching at the community division. I started teaching at the community division right when I started my master's, and I also started at Miss Porter's in Farmington. Because when I started my master's, Chris actually had moved back down to Virginia, and so I took over some of his teaching, which at the community division and at Miss Porter's. So right away, I was already teaching. I don't know, at least 15 to 20 students a week, even during portions of the master's. So I was teaching a lot, and I had so much information from my 2 years there, and I think it took probably at least another 3 or 4 years before I could actually get a lot of it into my fingers.
Hmm.
And really, I made a bunch of mistakes in terms of practicing or not practicing. Just, I didn't do everything exactly how I should have at that point, but eventually a lot of it kicked in. So I did a ton of practicing and a ton of teaching, and not a whole lot of performing during the years immediately after my master's. For maybe about 3 or 4 years,
Mm-hmm.
I would play some background music gigs. I play some wedding gigs, um, but I don't think I started doing a bunch of recitals until 3 or 4 years after my master's. And I'm trying to remember. I don't remember the exact time that I was started playing in the quartet with Chris
Right.
and Nick and Jeremy, but it was a bunch of years after grad school. Probably not till about 2010 or so.
What would you say to yourself looking back at that time where you said that you weren't doing things the way that you should have been? What would you have said to yourself? Are some of the specifics?
Well, I resisted when if it's. I mean, there are things that I could do better throughout my personal life and throughout all that stuff. But we're
Mhm.
talking about guitar specifically. I resisted the whole singing thing very much, and singing letter names specifically. And this is something that isn't unique to Hart, but it's definitely not ubiquitous for people to sing.
In the guitar community.
Right. So
Right.
I think singing letter names and memorizing letter names I resisted that to my own detriment for way too long, and I don't think I ever really did get it the way that I was meant to, or it was hoped that I would.
Right.
So that's one of the things that I know I really wish that if I were doing that time over after school, I would take it more seriously and I would have stuck with it. But it's hard. It was really hard.
It's hard when you come to it as a young adult, and in some ways you're like, this goes against everything I think I'm supposed to be doing. And it sounds dramatic, but that's sort of how it feels.
Yeah. Yeah, it's well, it's just I think there is a degree of humility that you need to sit and sing. Like I have some music out here. If I were to sing one measure of note names for a brand new piece, I think now I'd probably be fine. But back
Yeah.
then, I wanted to play. I wanted to shred. I wanted to play. I'm looking at Villa-Lobos etudes. I
Right.
wanted to play them, and I wanted to play them fast, and I wanted to play them, as well as everybody else. I didn't want to sit and just repeat one measure over and over, singing the note names until I could do it without looking. But apparently I didn't understand that that was actually how I would have gotten to those goals, or that was a big
Exactly.
step towards those goals. So yeah, I had been given good instruction and I followed it really well, but I didn't follow through on it as much as I wish I had in the, I don't know how you describe 2007 to 2012. Is that still the early 2000s?
That would have been in my life a hot mess. I was still living at home.
Well, I could probably say the same for me.
So at what point did you go from doing the classical guitar thing to now starting to play pit shows? And then in my understanding of you and your trajectory, there was a point where the classical guitar stuff started to take a back seat to the stuff that eventually led you to all these shows that you're doing now.
So I played in the New England Guitar Quartet. I think we were together for about 3 years, maybe a little somewhere 3 to 4 years,
Yeah.
and loved playing in that group. It was
You guys need to write a book about that experience someday, because I've heard bits and pieces of the saga.
yeah,
That's for another conversation.
That's for another conversation. The full nitty gritty, but there was a lot of coffee involved for sure.
Of course.
But I loved playing that in that group, and I loved playing the music that we played. I loved playing with those guys, and I feel like at that point that was the most invested in classical guitar music that I had ever been. So when that group fizzled out, I was kind of down about playing classical guitar, because that was supposed to be what I wanted that to be. My thing was playing chamber music, but with my friends who were guitar players. And I thought it, and I have no regrets about it fizzling out. That's just the way things go. But at that time, I was kind of down on playing classical guitar. I couldn't find any solo music that really excited me or that would keep my attention for very long. And at the same time, I had always wanted to learn how to get better at electric guitar and jazz specifically. And I'm still not very good at jazz, but
it's pronounced Yaz.
It's a soft J.
Yaz flute.
Like jogging.
Yeah.
Little Anchorman quote. So
you drink the blood from the skull. Is that what he says? You know what I'm talking about?
Oh yeah, I know that movie too well. Anyway, so I decided to start getting a little more serious about some electric guitar things that I wanted to do, and I just wanted to play something for fun. And I started playing with a couple bands that didn't really do much, but one of the bands worked quite a bit, and I made a little bit of money doing that. But I was able to, develop my reading chops a little bit for that one of those bands. And I stumbled, I don't remember exactly. The first show I played was at a high school in Suffield Academy.
Hmm.
And it was with Nick, actually. We played The Wedding Singer, and that was just because a friend of a friend, or actually no, Chris recommended both of us, and so we played that gig
A friend of a
together.
friend, indeed.
uh, we played that show, and then I got recommended for another one, not maybe like the next year, and it seemed like over the course of 2 or 3 years, enough a lot of people just, I would do as good of a job as I could at these shows, and I was able to get recommended for other ones or called back the next year for ones that I had done before. And it got to the, and then I'm trying to remember some of the timing things, but it just picked up gradually, but
Hmm.
almost exponentially. So each year one year I did 2 shows. The next year I did maybe 3 or 4. And then the next year was like 5 or 6. And then the next summer I played 16 weeks in a row.
Right.
Until, the past 3 years, I've basically played 5 nights a week for, I don't know, maybe 45 weeks out of the year for the past 3 years. Just gradually picked up.
What is that life like, for the layman,
Um,
of not well? I was just going to say the difference between the classical guitar concertizing gigging world versus the pit life.
well, I think because it's hard to sum it up, really, I think, for me, because playing in a pit is more similar to playing in the when I was doing chamber music or playing with the quartet, because you're playing with a group. So the stress of being absolutely perfect all by yourself on a stage as a soloist doesn't really exist, or I never experienced it. So it's more of a group effort.
Right.
I would say that the musicianship and the musicians that I've worked with are extreme. It's at an extremely high level. Um, so in that regard, it's not any different in terms of the demands of what is expected of you. It's just the aesthetic is different. You know, you don't have to. There's not a whole lot of virtuosity playing in theater.
Well,
Every
you
now and
don't
then,
see it. You don't see it in the same way that you would see if someone was playing the chaconne.
right? It's
I
not
I,
as
rem-
exposed, but it's
I
it's
remember when I subbed for Nick doing hair. You'll know this guy. I'm sure you play with him all the time. His Sizzle. What's his name?
Seth.
Seth.
Yeah.
And we were doing hair, and I don't remember, maybe it was Emmett was the MD, and they said something like, oh, no, we're doing this in A, and he goes, oh, okay, and then he just boom, like just could transpose it for a trumpet player, right? Like whatever, but for a lowly guitar player, like that's a skill that we don't think that we need until you see someone do something like that.
Yeah.
So that's why I say the virtuosity is more hidden, right? Because think about the skill required to do something like that. He's probably been doing that kind of stuff for years in order to make a decision. That was like the night of a show because he was subbing too, I believe.
Yeah, and I've had to do it a handful of times. It's not something that happens as often as you might think, at least not in my experience so far. And I've only had to sight read shows, like, of all the shows I've done, I think I've done, I don't know, maybe 50 different productions, but I've only had to sight read shows maybe 3 or 4 times
Hmm.
where I actually don't see the music until I get there. And so that it's scary when it happens, but it doesn't happen all that often. But
Right.
yeah, the virtuosity is different. It's not, maybe it's not as explicit. It's kind of like the virtuosity and how tight can you be rhythmically with the other players?
Right.
How kind of in the pocket with the drummer can you be, or how well can you phrase with the reeds who are sitting like 30 feet away from you on the other side of the pit, and you can only hear them through headphones, but you still have to phrase with them and line your part up because every now and then the guitar doubles a melody.
Right.
It's chamber music.
Yeah, yeah. What one of the things that I noticed about the very limited experience I have with pit gigs is that as a and I suppose I could say this for my rock band experience too, as a classical guitarist, I'm looking inward when I'm performing. I'm paying attention to myself. I'm paying attention to the music. I'm paying attention to my body, whatever it is. As a pit musician or a band, if you're playing in a rock band, you have to then also have a version of yourself sort of out in the audience. How do I sound? What's my balance like? Am I improvising too much? Should I maybe change this voicing? Is this overpowering? You in my experience, you have to look outward, not just inward.
Yeah, that seems to be accurate.
I don't know. I played 3 or 4 shows. I did uh, the Clowns with Andy Mayo. They were doing like a playthrough of that, like a what was it called, an open read type thing. They were workshopping it,
Okay.
and that was a lot of fun. And then I did Altar Boys. I did the whole run of Altar Boys, which is so much fun. And those guys, the actors were awesome. And I subbed for Hair, and then I think I did something else. That was an interesting gig.
Was
The
that at Playhouse?
That was at Playhouse, and it wasn't just the butts that was interesting. The thing that was interesting was I love that there's like a guitar solo moment where they're like, just make noise, and like you can't, for once everyone's like, yeah, that's really cool. Where in my experience as a guitarist, I was always apologizing, and that's why I don't do it.
Yeah. I like trying to think of your statement about playing inward or being more outwards. See how I relate to that.
I guess like in a practical experience, if I'm playing Bach and I not at heart where there's people that are in charge of my grade there and ego, but if
Hmm.
I'm out playing in the world and I play Bach and I decide to do something or I make a huge mistake, the consequences are going to be on my shoulders as I leave. But I haven't really damaged anything, anybody else's experience, hopefully. If I'm doing something and I play a wrong note in a pit or a rock band, or I do something and I really do something out of character, if I'm playing too loud, if I'm showboating, if I'm doing something that's inappropriate, I've now put all of those people
All
who are
right.
on stage sharing that weight with me in a very uncomfortable position. And I suppose you could say the same thing about chamber music, but in my experience with my flute player and we had such um, a good understanding of each other and of the music, where I think we were prepared for any sort of like, oh, I'm going to try to do this or try to do that. I think we respected the music a little too much to make those kinds of decisions. I don't know. Maybe I'm just
No, no, I get what you're saying better now. I think in pits we have the music director who is sort of is the conductor, and the music director will tell you if you're playing too loud, or if the improvised lick you just played was out of style or inappropriate for what they're trying to do, and they're the conductor. So the the way I approach playing a show is it's not about what I think about the show, or it's not about what I feel these notes should be. It's about serving the show and serving the music, and the final word lays with the MD. So I ask for feedback a lot, and I ask, when they want to give me room to do what I do, then I do what I do, and they'll, if they don't like it, they'll tell me. So it's kind of, but because like what you just said with chamber music, you respect the music so much that you don't want to do anything to take away from what it's supposed to do. I treat pit playing the same way. If I get an open solo in like Grease, if I'm playing Grease and there's a guitar solo, I'm not gonna do like a Van Halen thing, like Back to the Future when he
why
starts
not?
tapping.
Why not?
Exactly.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
that's why it's a good gig for me, and it's probably some other people might get in that situation like, oh, I'm gonna shred, I get a solo, this is where I get to do
Me.
what I
You could
do.
say it. You could. It's me.
Okay, it's you, Ben. But for me, I'm going to play a Chuck Berry lick or something, and it's going to fit. And the goal is going to be to make it sound like it belonged there. And in that regard, nobody should really even notice it. It's just part of the backdrop of what's on the stage, and that's where I'm most comfortable, kind of being a part of a bigger thing, just and playing my role. And except my role is either under the stage or behind the stage, dressed in all black, so nobody can see me.
I like that. So nobody would notice that it's there. I mean, that makes, that puts it in perspective. And you're also talking about being a part of a bigger picture, which is probably why the quartet felt like such a home to you.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
but hearing you talk about all of these different things that you have to be able to draw on it from a moment's notice, how do you approach this idea of a well-rounded guitarist who is, because you're not just sitting there practicing pit music all day. I mean, I see your stuff on Instagram. You're like shredding Marvin licks and picking up, playing the black Decameron and doing all this stuff. What's your approach, like schedule wise, to trying to become a well-rounded musician? And I suppose philosophically too.
Well, I think part of why theater is a good thing for me is because I do truly and honestly really do enjoy just about every kind of music. I love to play, and I love to play lots of different things. So it's easy for me to just follow different areas and just kind of follow my muse to see, all right, today, like maybe the first 2 weeks of quarantine, I was transcribing a lot of George Benson, and then working a little bit out of the Charlie Parker Omnibook, just because wanted to get back into some bebop stuff. And then I started working on the Marvin tune, or I started working on. I was actually somebody sent me music. Do you know the Goat Rodeo Sessions, which was Chris Steele and Yo-Yo Ma
No.
and Edgar Meyer? Check it out; it's really good. But somebody sent me the score and parts for one of the tunes off that record. And I was like, all right, well, I can work on my mandolin reading chops. So I think for a week I worked on that, and it's so hard that I can't even come close to playing it. But it was a kind of fun thing to work on. So for me, diving into all the different styles that I may need in theater is the fun of playing. That's kind of why I
Mm,
play,
yeah.
so that I can explore all those different things. Today I was doing more transcribing of modern jazz guitarist.
This wasn't released yet, but I did an interview with a friend of mine, Brett, who's down in Nashville, and he's a keyboard player, and he came from this very serious jazz classical stuff up here, and then went down there and realized I have to be able to play anything at any time if I want to pay my bills. And it sounds like I think you both have a respective love for the genres of music that you're playing, but it's kind of honorable that when somebody needs you, you're the one who's there, who loves it and can do it. Because I think there's no shortage of stories of guitarists showing up to important gigs, and face planting.
Yeah, that's the fear. I've taken lots of gigs where somebody says, "Hey, do you play this?" And I say yes, and then I go learn how to play it.
Right.
It's just I think that's kind of part of the theater world, or part of even just part of commercial music,
Mm.
is that if you don't know how to do something, and this is actually something that I think goes back to classical guitar. If I don't know how to do something, I know how to learn how to do it. And that's kind of through my training at heart, and all the way I've practiced classical guitar over the years has led it to be so. All right, like I played that Marvin head that I posted last week, and that's I don't usually play things that fast, but I know how to get something to be that fast, and I know the
Yeah.
processes I have to go through to do it. I have a good idea of how long it'll take me, just based on the metronome marking. So, and it's kind of I can confidently say yes to something, even if I can't already do it, because I know that I'll be able to learn how to do it.
It's really incredible what those 2 years can do to you just because of the caliber of education. And I don't want to get into it, but there's plenty of killer players or not so killer players that went to places, and you think, oh, well, that's impressive on paper, but what did you really learn from that? Have you really changed? Are you really a better person when you came out of that? But what I want to ask you now, I know we're getting a little close to both of our respective bedtimes, although Dark Souls 3 is staring at me from across the room. Um,
I don't even know what that is.
it's
Is that
the series is heralded as like the hardest game series
is
ever
that
created.
video games? I don't know video games.
Yeah. Oh no, no. It's I lock myself in my closet, Dark Souls, and just laugh at what I did to my head. I don't know, man.
Yeah,
Um,
I think I was tragically bad at video games when I was a kid, so I just don't play them.
that's probably better for you. How did you get into the Broadway scene? Because a couple years ago, I think when I came to pick up that guitar from you, I believe the classical guitar that I sold to one of my students, um, you had said, "Oh, I'm starting to crack the Broadway scene."
So I haven't fully cracked it yet. It's a tough thing to crack when you live 2.5 hours away. Um, you have to be there to play there. I did have an opportunity last winter or early last kind of March and April. I played for 2 months of an off Broadway show. So I stayed down in New York for the better part of 2 months and played that show.
What show is that?
It was a musical parody of The Big Bang Theory. So
Okay.
that's a genre right now. Or it's been a genre, but it's a genre of parodies of TV shows. So there's a parody of The Office that I think was still running before everything shut down there, but that had been running for several years, and we were in the same building in the theater upstairs from them.
Please tell me there's one for Everybody Loves Raymond.
I don't know, but I'll pitch that to somebody and see. see, see.
Pitch
So
it to Netflix. They'd greenlight it.
I haven't fully broken in down there. I've been able to make a lot of friends who do play on Broadway, who either sub or have their own chair down there. And the way to do it is that I think you try to get on somebody's sub list, and that's generally the way it works. When I would talk to the guitar player from Jersey Boys down there, he basically said, you've got to be here. He's like, if you want to be on a sub list, you have to be here and you have to be available. Otherwise, you're not incredibly useful as a sub if
What
you're too far away.
what's the difference in caliber of musicianship from someone who's on top of their game here to someone who is starting to sub down in the Broadway scene?
So the musicians that I've worked with in Connecticut, in at like the Goodspeed people, the people who play at Ivoryton, and then the people I've played with a bunch of other places are are top level. They're New York City caliber. They just don't live there. But the guitar players in New York City are terrifying. I've been down. I've done some recording things. Have you ever seen the Apartmen Sessions
Yeah, yeah.
on YouTube? So I've been down for a bunch of those. And anytime I'm in a room with those people, at least half of them have Broadway chairs or have toured supporting major pop artists or jazz artists. And it's like being that, starting at the conservatory on the first day again, where you're just the tiniest fish surrounded by these players who are so good. And that's what it feels like every time I go down there. And I don't feel like it takes away anything from what I can do, but man, they're good. They're
Yeah.
In order to thrive down there, you've got to be good. You've got to have lots of things going, and everybody that I've met can really play, and it's so much fun. I consider myself pretty lucky to have gotten to play with a lot of those people and to meet a lot of them, and it's inspiring. I'll say that for sure.
Where do you think those people get their education? Is it, do you think, a similar path where you get a certain skill set and then have to develop that on your own? Or is this situations where these players have been playing their entire lives? What have you seen?
I'm not really sure. A lot of people I've met have gone to Berkeley because I think the Apartment Sessions group is, a lot of those people went to Berkeley, so there's a big Berkeley network down there. Um, but you know, a lot of them, I think it's the combination of getting good instruction throughout their lives and then following through on it
Yeah.
thoroughly, like what I didn't do those couple of years after grad school. But they all seem to, it seems effortless when you watch them play. So you know they've all spent their time in the shed and they've all done all the hard work that you do when you're in college or when you're in undergrad, when you're in your master's. And then they all just sit there and effortlessly make really, really great music. It's I don't know how they do it. If I did, I would do it too.
Before we go, can you give us a little gear rundown? What are you using in your, what are you playing nowadays for
So
equipment?
I've acquired a bunch of guitars because it seems important to have the right guitar for the gig. Um, so I still have, I have one classical guitar. I have my Chapman, um, which I love, and I've played Chapman guitars for a while now. I have a Strat Matelli 335, all, none of them Fender, none of them Gibson, all
Mhm.
different brands, but you know, in that style. I've got a tenor banjo and a 5-string banjo and a ukulele and a mandolin and a lap steel. I currently have a resonator and a dobro sitting around. Um, so I've got lots of different guitars to cover the theater gigs, and I'm kind of in a fortunate position to be able to have all these,
Right.
which is nice. But when I play a show, I use the Line 6 Helix, which is Line 6 all self-contained modeling unit, which I'm sure you know, but you can plug up to 4 instruments in it. I get all my amp sounds, all my effects. I can plug a microphone into it. I can plug my steel string into it. So I use that basically as the center of my pit rig.
And you keep it set on the insane mode, right?
Yeah, all the time. Like Line 6 Spider, insane amp.
When I worked at Music and Arts, there would, in a lot of the lesson studios, they would have 2 amps. It would be like a Fender, like Hot Rod Junior or whatever it is, like
Yep. The Blues Junior probably.
yeah, something like that, and then the Line 6. And I would be like, can we just get anything else? Like, you can give me a crate 20-watt 1-channel amp, but you, because you and Nick both play the same Line 6, and it sounds good.
Thanks. Yeah, I like it a lot because of the options. I'm getting better at it, at dialing it in. Um, there are lots of people who get great sounds out of it, so I try to learn from them. I know a lot of people on Broadway are using them now. A lot of people on Broadway use Fractal too, the
Mhm.
XFX stuff, and those all sound great. I think any of those units, once you know how to use them well enough and really learn how to dial it in, you can get such good sounds. I do have a couple small amps that if I'm playing an actual gig on a stage with a band, I'll take an amp just because I like to use an amp and it's fun to have that sound. But for the majority of what I do, I use the Helix, and I have a small QSC monitor, or I have headphones or in-ears that I'll use depending on what they
Have you,
have at the theater.
have you ever seen someone roll up with like a Marshall stack? And like, I'm here for
I've never seen it in
Greece.
person, but I have seen it on Facebook. I have seen I have seen pictures of people using like a 212, like a small head and a 212 in a pit.
That's
And
me.
it's
That was me. I did that for Altar Boys, but then also Altar Boys, the band was a part of it because Altar Boys was these guys with a rock band was part of
yeah,
the
yeah.
shtick. So I had my 212 there. Last question for you: what would you say for someone who is getting into music, maybe something a little bizarre like the guitar, and wants to make their living out of money that comes from either playing or teaching that instrument?
Um, I would say one really practical thing is to, as a guitar player, work on your reading. Make sure you can read, and it doesn't matter what you're reading. Just pick up a book of music and read from it for as many minutes a day as you can. I used to do an hour a day of reading. So just
That's with the numbers underneath, right?
with the tab. No, I would try to go with no tabs, but I wouldn't actually learn how to play any of the stuff. I would just read it. I would just practice working out the chords, practice working at the voicings. I'm better at reading four voice counterpoint than I am a single melody because I learned how to read on classical guitar. But I would say the reading stuff, and then whether you're studying classical guitar or just teaching yourself some electric guitar or whatever, or jazz guitar, I think really do what you're doing wholeheartedly, but keep your ear open to other things. Really do that one thing. I really did classical guitar, and I think I got the benefit of that more so if I had just kind of dabbled in it.
Yeah.
So really dive in, but make sure you're keeping your ears open for other things, because that's where, if you want to just play classical guitar, go for it and do it. And it's hard, but if that's what you need to do, it's going to be really rewarding. But if you want to make sure that you're available to do other things, keep an open ear.
Yeah. Absolutely. Before we go, is there anything that you want to plug? I know the shows are on hold right now, but is there anything that you want to promote?
I have a terrible Instagram page because I'm awful at social media, but it's Dan Hartington Guitar. If you want to see my handful of licks that I learned. And that's about it. I'm trying to be more active on that, but I really, really am bad at it. So
I hear me too.
nothing. This interview is my my big
contribution
thing that I'll be plugging soon, unless you decide that it's so bad that it's not getting released.
Oh, I was supposed to press the record button.
Oh, we'll have to do it.
We'll have to do. No, I'm good. I'm busy. I gotta go to work tomorrow.
Yeah, nothing major to plug, but feel free to check out my Instagram.
I'll make sure to put that at the bottom. Dan, thank you very much for
Thanks, Ben. It's a lot of fun.
Thank you.